Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to another table talk. Today's topic of discussion is push rods and linkages, control horns, setting up quick connects if you want to use those on your servos or within your linkages. I've already done another video discussing the servos that I use in my park jets and why I use those servos. But obviously those are pretty useless unless you have something that will transfer the servo input to the actual control surface. So I scratch build all my own push rods. There's one you can see there, 2mm carbon rod and just a little nylon clevis here that I get from Hobby King. Now I'm going to write a blog post supporting this video, which you'll find linked down below. A long time ago on an AMC blog, I actually sat down when I first started building, scratch building my own push rods. I wrote an article. I sat down like a bit of a Poindexter and did all the math. And I used to use these threaded, this is a standard sort of threaded, 12-inch threaded Dubro metal push rod with it's already got the Z bend or the Z bend in it depending on where you live, and it has a threaded end with a nylon clevis on the end. So anyway, I did a bit of research based on cost and weight and all that sort of stuff, and it ended up for me in the long run it actually is a bit cheaper and lighter for me to use these push rods. The other thing is, as I progressed in my park jet career and started experimenting with moving the weight distribution around in my planes, lots of times as I moved servos, especially like the Elevon servos, further forward to get them closer to the CG, 12-inch push rods weren't long enough. So with this size, I can make them pretty much any length I want. These 2mm carbon rods come in meter lengths, or about 39 inches. So anyway, the other thing is too is that I always found it a bit of a pain in the butt when I wanted to I was hooking up my my linkages on a new plane, or if I wanted to adjust anything, because in order to adjust this, for fine tune it for length to get that control surface nice and flat, I had to sort of disconnect the this clevis, twist it, turn it in a little bit to shorten it, or twist it out to lengthen it, and just was just becoming a bit of a pain. So I have another system now using these push rods. So I'll talk a little bit, just a little bit quickly about how I make these. They're very simple to make. Again, I get these clevis, nylon clevis. I get a bunch of these from Hobby King. They're dirt cheap, and they have a little they sort of snap, and they have a little I know it's very hard to see, but I'll have pictures in the blog. There's like a little ball on the end of it, so when you clip it together, it sort of snaps into place, and then it takes a little bit of work to get it apart. So they're very secure that way. So I do have to drill these out just a tiny bit. I can't remember the size of the drill bit that I use, but I do have to drill this the hole out just a tiny little bit to get the 2mm carbon rod to fit in there, and then it still fits in pretty snugly. So then once I drill that out, so what I do then is I mix up some epoxy. I suppose you could use, even maybe super glue or CA of some kind. I've just always used epoxy. It's worked out well for me. Mix up a little bit of epoxy, and then, with a toothpick, I'll take the toothpick and I'll just push the toothpick down inside the hole here just to get a little bit of a coating down the inside of the tube there on the clevis. And then what I'll do is I'll take the end of the push rod that's going to go into the clevis, and I'll just get a little bit more epoxy on the end of that, and then just push that down inside. And I just push it down so that it's sort of level with where my fingers are there, just to the end of that. And then any excess epoxy that comes out, I just sort of smooth it around, sort of right here. So you can see there's a little bit of epoxy on the outside there. And then just let that set up and cure. So, let the epoxy cure for a good, it's 5-minute epoxy that I use, but let it cure for, a good 15 minutes, and boom, you got yourself a push rod. All right, so on the other end, I use these linkage stoppers. Whoops, these little bits flying around here. They come in. There's like five parts of them. I'll just hold them in my hand. There. So you've got the main body of the linkage stopper with a threaded piece on the bottom, and again I'll have pictures, close-ups, and links in the blog post. And then you've got two washers, two very small washers, and then a little nut that goes on the end of this threaded piece to secure it, and then a little tiny grub screw that goes down the center in order to secure the push rod. So what I do with those is I've got one made up here already. Is I put one washer on the thread. So I want a washer on. Let me grab this little thing. I put a washer on like that, and then I'll put it into the to the servo arm, and then put the other washer on the other side. So now the nylon of the servo arm is in between the two washers. Oop. And then what I do is I just take the tiniest, before I put the little nut on, is I just take the very, very tiniest little bit of this is like a no-name blue Loctite or medium Loctite. I just put the tiniest little dab right on the very end there, and then just put the nut. Put the nut down on top, and then what I do is I just sort of tighten that until it's going to so that it'll freely move, but don't tighten it down too hard, because then once the Loctite cures, it's a little bit hard to do it. So you just have to get it sort of tight enough, not too loose, not too tight, and then you're good to go. And I think I maybe have once had one of these nuts back off on me and come out. But that works really, really well. Now for the push rod, sometimes you'll have to this one fit in okay, but sometimes you'll either have to drill out the hole just a tiny little bit with the same size bit that I use back here, or other times what I've done is I'll just take very sharp razor knife, and then just sort of shave just the tiniest little bit off of the end of the push rod, so that it'll fit in to the linkage stopper. Now the trick with these this little grub screw is I think it's a 1.5 millimeter. What you want to do is you want to tighten it sort of just enough so that it just gently bites into the carbon. You don't want to reef it down so that you crush the carbon, because then you'll break the carbon. So I just gently screw it on until you just sort of feel it starting to bite into the carbon, and then it should hold really, really well. I've never had one of these things slide out by doing that. But again, it takes a little practice to get it just right, because if you reef down too hard, you'll just crush the carbon, and then it's the carbon can actually break. If you've crushed it and weakened it too much, the carbon can actually break. So that's how I set mine up, or that's how I build my push rods and linkage. Now for control horns, I use a couple of different types of control horns. These are actually the ones, if you've built any flight test planes, these are the ones that Flight Test uses. I ordered these. There's a vendor in Canada now that carries all the Flight Test products. So I just order up a bunch of these, and if I'm careful and I'm patient enough, I've actually recycled these, where take them out of a plane, and then just with a sharp razor knife, I've just gently taken off the foam and the epoxy that's on it, and I've actually been able to reuse them. They're pretty beefy. I don't know what they're, probably 1.5 millimeters thick, of craft grade plywood, The nice thing I like about them is that they have three holes in them, as you can see, and so that way sometimes when I'm dialing in a plane, rather than messing around if I think, oh, I've got way too much throw there or not enough throw, I can just simply adjust my my push rod, my clevis into the proper hole. Now again, I do have to drill these out just a little bit. I think with like I think it's like a 1/32 bit, just to get this little allow this little piece of the clevis to fit in. But these have worked really, really well. Now I use these primarily on my my elevons and my rudders. These are the old, you know, if you've ever built an RC Powers plane, and most, I think on our NAMC plans we used to have the same thing. I use these primarily on my ailerons just because you know, early on in the hobby I bought gobs and gobs of them. So I use these for my ailerons because my ailerons, you know, I don't need as much travel on my my ailerons, so I don't need to do a whole lot of funky adjustment there, and whatever adjustment I can do, I just do quick and easy in my radio. So and it saves me from using them. I don't know, maybe there's a tiny difference in weight here. Obviously they're smaller and these are a little bit thinner, but so those are the control horns that I use. Okay, so there's lots of different options, you know, but folks, depending on what you can get, folks make their own push rods out of all kinds of different things. I know I've read lots of people go to like a hardware store and you buy those, I think they're about this long, and you can buy a whole bundle of them. They've got those little flags on the end of them. I don't know that they call those surveyor flags, but you know, they're flags like if you're, say you're getting a sprinkler system installed in your house, or you know or in your yard, or you know, you've had the power company came by and you know wants to mark where all the power lines are underground at your house. They'll lay those out. So hopefully you know what I mean. But they've got a pretty a fairly stiff but flexible wire. So I know lots of people have used those. On my planes, and I've had people ask me this before. The one thing about these carbon fiber push rods, obviously, is they're not, you know, you can't sort of bend them like you can with, you know, these metal push rods. So I just run them straight, and I actually run it at an angle. So I know, you know, I've had people question me because my control horn on my aileron here is actually sort of at an angle, and you know, most people have the control horn sort of, you know, running 90 degrees to the actual hinge. Mine is a bit angled here just to accommodate this, and I've also got my servo sort of pulled out and angled a little bit. Because my ailerons don't travel too far, like I mentioned before, I'm not really worried about that. I've never really had any problem with resolution or any of that sort of stuff, so that works fine for me. But there are options that I have tried. And I've seen people, I know there's guys at my field that fly foamies that actually use bamboo skewers for push rods. I know people use, this is like a piece of 3mm carbon tube. Now the thing with the tube is, depending on what the inside diameter is, you can either cut, you know, a chunk of this Dubro, you know, thicker wire, and push it down inside, you know, with a little bit of epoxy, push it down inside, and then, you know, make the length of wire whatever length you think you need if you want to be able to bend it, you know, have a push rod that's bent. You can also use, like this is one of these .032 micro Dubro push rods. You know, you can buy these, you can set these up actually. Normally they come with like a plastic tube on the outside of them. I don't know what's happened to my plastic tube, but you know, you can actually set these up so that they're actually bent, and you know, they'll slide easily inside the plastic tube. Or you can, what I've also, and I've actually experimented and done this in the past, again, if you've got a tube that's got a pretty small diameter, this is just a piece of that 032 wire, you can push that down inside, or the other thing you can do is just sort of lash it to the the push rod to the end of it. And what I found is this is a what is this called? Ultra B oral floss, or Oral B Ultra Floss, and it's kind of soft. It almost looks like a piece of wool, but then when you pull it tight, it goes, you know, when you need to floss your teeth, it goes pretty pretty straight and pretty thin. But the nice thing about it is, you know, you can take your little piece of wire on the end here, and you know, and you can just kind of wrap it around, you know, numerous times. And because it's fairly soft, and then once you've got that wrapped, is you can take either some epoxy or maybe like a little bit of CA or super glue, and just put it on that all over that dental floss, and then let it cure, and then it straps that piece of wire to the end of it. And then normally what I've done in the past is then I'll just slide a little piece, just to you know, for extra enforcement, is I'll just slide a little piece of heat shrink over top of it. Now you do have to be careful if you put the heat shrink on, you know, be very careful how much heat you apply, because you know, especially maybe if you've used CA or super glue, it might catch fire, or if you're using epoxy, you might melt it. So just, you know, use a gentle application of heat. But I've used that before in the bad old days when I built my trusty 300 plus flight F-18 version 3. I had a single servo for my rudders, and I had my push rods running to one servo with the long, you know, the double header kind of servo arm, and I had those small wires on the end. And then I also, unfortunately, I couldn't find one. I also had, for these this really thin wire, you can actually buy linkage stoppers similar to these, but they're of course much smaller. Dubro probably sells them, and in fact, I think maybe when I bought those micro push rods, they actually might have come with those little small linkage stoppers. Anyway, the nice thing that I like about the linkage, since I started using the linkage stoppers, is it just makes it so much easier if you know, if I need to adjust, like if you've watched my video on how I made in a park jet and dial in a park jet. You know, sometimes after several flights, you zero out the trim and you find out that your you know, one of your control surfaces is not sitting dead center at zero trim. So it's a lot easier to just take, you know, this is a 1.5 millimeter hex driver. I also have one of these in my toolbox, my flight box. You know, you just loosen off the little grub screw. Move the surface until it's where you need it, and then just tighten up the grub screw again. It makes life a whole lot easier, than, for me anyway, than you know, popping like I mentioned before, popping this thing off, you know, unscrewing it half a turn or 2 turns or whatever, and then, you know, you have to play around with it, and you still don't get it sort of quite exactly dead center. But anyway. Yeah, so there's lots of different options. Again, for control horns too, I know people have cut their control horns, made control horns out of just, you know, plain old used up gift cards, you know, hard plastic gift cards or credit cards or whatever. I also have seen people use, like, these are just those, you buy them in the packs from the buck store, like the dental floss. You know, normally there's a piece of dental floss across here. And I know that people have, you know, sort of cut these wider things off, drilled a hole in them, and then used those as control horns as well. So there's all kinds of options. You know, I'm certainly not you know, trying to shove my way of doing things down anybody's throat. But anyway, lots of options to think of. You know, whatever you find works best for you. Obviously, again, like I've said a few times, depends on what you can get, depending on where you live in your part of the world, and you know, what you can afford, and just what works well for you. But like I said, there's lots of different options. You know, like I said, I've used these carbon ones, and then what I do is I recycle them. So I've got push rods here for days. In fact, I've got so many that, you know, I've actually had to separate them out, and, you know, in this bag there's push rods between 8 and 10 inches, and then I've got another one that are 10 inches or greater, because I ended up with so many of these push rods. But they've worked super well for me, and and you know, fairly inexpensive for me to make, and they're stiff and strong and light. So anyway, there's a little bit of chatter about linkages. I won't talk specifically sort of on how I set up my planes. In the supporting blog post, I shot a video almost I guess about 3 years ago now, where I talked about when I made a real change in how I set my planes up. I'll have that in the blog post if you're interested in sort of how I set my linkages up and why. I think I discussed it a little bit in the servos video about how I like to set my linkages up for the way I like to fly. But anyway, so there you go, folks. Like I said, lots of options. You know, you can just get creative with whatever you can find. Like I said, I know lots of people that have made them out of those landscaping flags or surveyor flags, whatever way you want to call them. And you know, you buy a bunch of those at the hardware store. You've got, you know, 40, 25, 40, 50, I'm not sure what size bundles they sell them in, but you've got, you know, push rod wire ready to go. So yeah, what I will say is I'm getting close to the end of my my sort of redoing all of my ParkJet workshop videos. So I've built, renamed a playlist, and all of these videos will be going into one playlist, which I'll link in the blog post below. I have a few more videos that I want to shoot, and I know I've been cranking these out on a pretty regular basis because I wanted to get this done sort of before the spring and summer flying comes and the weather gets really nice, because I don't want to be, I'd rather be out flying than being cooped up in the house getting all these videos taken care of. But anyway, it's certainly my pleasure to do them, and it's my pleasure to share my experiences with you. So thanks very much for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them in the video, down in the video below, or on the supporting blog post, and I'll do my best to help you out. So thanks for watching again. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. ParkJet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.